Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Traci Scheepstra, and this is Embodied Learning's Body Talk. Every week we are having our series Body Talk where we talk about bringing the body into the school curriculum and into the classroom. Today we have a very special guest. This is Dr. Dranitsaris. So welcome, Anne. It's wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Traci. It's my great pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. So Anne, perhaps you could start by just telling the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I started my career more than 40 years ago in the helping professions, and going from being a massage therapist to a psychotherapist to a director of a health and wellness clinic for women, and finally into becoming an author and doing the work that I'm doing now with brain and behavior. It has always been my greatest intention to help people live life fully and to achieve their potential, regardless of the modality. And one of the things that I've discovered along my journey is that we have to make peace inside of ourselves with our body and our brain and our intention in the world and what we are trying to do in our life, whatever it may be, by really understanding the stresses that we bring to ourselves through our automatic thinking and everything that we can do to help mediate that inner conflict so that it doesn't affect our health, happiness, and well-being.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. Well, you and I have known each other a very long time. We have known each other actually for 18 years.
Wow.
You know, when I did the math,
A long time.
that's a very long time.
Yes.
And during that time, we've talked a lot about many of those things that you just mentioned. We've talked a lot about, again, uncertainty and how it can really impact how we feel, how it impacts our own lives. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to have this discussion with you today was because we are in a really different time in our world, a time that is quite unprecedented, that I don't think anybody's really experienced something like, you know, a global pandemic before. I know many of us experienced traumas and other experiences.
Yeah.
It's something that's very collective that we're kind of all going through together.
Absolutely.
And one thing I've really noticed is that, you know, many people have been feeling a level of trauma through going through sort of the experiences and the constant changes, sort of sometimes day to day, week to week. And what's happening is I'm really noticing that there is a real rise in mental health and in wellness. You know, there are people who are really starting to get quite fragmented in their own lives, in sort of dealing with sort of the uncertainties that are happening. And in particular, I'm really noticing something happening right now as we're sort of talking about going back to school and all of the decisions that are being made or not being made, and the responses that we're having with teachers and with parents in terms of how do we move forward.
Yes.
Yeah. And go ahead.
And there's so much to be talked about around this subject because we've, as you say, Traci, we have never all gone through a pandemic like this together. Even when there's been other outbreaks of illnesses like Ebola or cholera or those types of things, they haven't touched our lives, and it's never been touched in this global way. And so we have come to feel safe globally to a certain extent, and of course in first world countries where we feel a lot safer, and we depend on external routines, on that which is familiar, to be our comfort zone, to give us that feedback that we're actually safe in our life. And of course, there's all kinds of uncertainty always in our life, and safety is a bit of a, you know, I think these things make me safe, but sometimes they really imprison me too. But we don't always look inside of ourselves to cultivate that feeling of safety in us. Safety comes from me not being in conflict with myself, and from not winding myself with thoughts like, oh my God, it's going to be a disaster, and oh my God, you know, everyone's going to get sick. And when we actually don't know what's going to happen, we're not sure of what's going to happen. And if we're not part of creating the safety, that safe way of going back and creating safety in the classrooms, in the case of educators, then we can wind ourselves up into a state where our mental health is affected by it.
Right.
And so looking at what we can do as opposed to fearing what might happen is a much more powerful and safe approach to what's going on. There's no perfect approach. There's there's just a whole bunch of really inexperienced people going at this in a diverse set of ways.
For sure. Because I think what I'm really noticing now, just well, one in sort of the posts I see on social media, also in speaking with my friends who are in education that will be going back into the classroom, whether they're principals or they're school teachers, again, parents who are making decisions to remove their children from school completely, or not even sure if where they are, what they should do.
Yes.
And it's so how do we really talk to them about not getting caught up in the fear? So you already talked a bit more about that, but that's the part where I really, while I absolutely feel deep compassion for the fear that's there and the concern, I also know, as you mentioned, that when we stay there, then it really does start to impact every aspect of our life.
Yes.
And it can really challenge our ability to think straight, and of course it really gets rooted in our bodies, and so things just sort of slide from there in a really negative direction. So
yes, yeah, they do. And this is where, just in terms of being purposeful and making decisions on behalf of our own family, on behalf of children, that everyone has to be prepared to make their own personal stand around this, because looking to authority to define safety in that way is going to create more anxiety, particularly if we don't agree with what the authority is telling us to do. And really, there isn't an authority around how to bring kids and teachers and educators back to school safely. No one has ever done that before during a pandemic. And so if we are used to having decisions be made for us, then this is going to be very challenging to say, despite the mandate for teachers to go back to school, I choose not to teach in that environment. If it's going to cost me my job, I will figure it out. I will find a way of being safe, of taking care of myself during this time, because I just cannot align myself with that decision. The same with kids going back to school. I will send my children back to school only if they're expected to, where I go into the classroom myself, for example, and make sure that the classrooms are safe, that we have our own personal criteria. And these are the types of things that empower us. And that although we might feel a little bit anxious because we don't know what's going to happen anytime we make a choice that puts us outside of mainstream, whether that will end up serving us, but it actually serves us to stay integrated and not feel that we're being victimized by the decisions that other people are making right now in society. And our lovely neighbors to the south, you can see what's happening as a result of an authoritarian mandate to go back. Everybody has to go back to school, and a week later everybody has to stay home from school.
Right.
And so each of us has to check in and feel that we do have choice. We have that power to make our own choices, but our brain is, you know, because our brain has a tendency and a bias toward negativity, those automatic negative fear thoughts are more likely to come up faster and more frequently as we watch social media, as we watch the news, as we engage with other people about their fears.
Mm-hmm.
And so really focusing on what we can do, the choices that we can make, and doing whatever we can to affirm our own inner safety, because regardless of it, whether we lose some money, we lose something now, that state will be temporary.
Right. Absolutely. So one thing that you really talked about is sort of our own inner state as well. So there's things we know that we have control over, things that we don't have control over, but we always have control over our own minds and our bodies to a degree. And so, you know, maybe we can also talk about how, you know, what are some things that are really specific that, you know, teachers can do if they are in the classroom and they can do with their students, that regardless of what's happening around that may feel scary or afraid, how do we come back to that present moment? How do we work through that so that we actually can be focusing on our wellness and not continue to be re-traumatized all the time, every time we walk into the classroom?
Yes, and it's such a great question, because we can raise our fears and we can raise our emotions, but if we don't have the tools, if we don't have some simple tools too, because, you know, one can say, oh, well, meditate every day, but, you know, when you're triggered and you're in the classroom and something triggers you, you're not going to sit in your desk and go, okay, well, I'm checking out for 5 minutes here while I regroup. And so some of the things that we can do over time as a tool is simply noticing our own thoughts and feelings and how we wind ourselves up. And as a mindfulness practitioner, I've long taught that the breath is one of the ways that we have of anchoring ourselves in the present moment, even if we have to stop, pause, close our eyes, take a breath, and refocus on the activity that we're doing. And so that easily refocusing on what we want to create in our classrooms and that safe space we want to create for our children. There's also, and this I learned years ago from Wayne Dyer when he talked about the match game in dealing with automatic negative thoughts. It's so brilliant. And you can play it with kids. It's like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? And then, okay, so now what's the best thing that can happen to you? And not leaving them just talking about what's wrong, but shifting them to focusing on what's right and what they can do and what will empower them.
Right.
And that third thing, and I always talk about what I do with my grandkids, what we've always done after a day is going through what is the best part of the day. What was that best experience that you had? Because a positive focus has to be cultivated, and kids love to share it. They love to tell their friends and tell other people what they did that was just so exciting and so great. And so when we give them the opportunity not just to express their concerns, but to express what they're excited about, that enlivens their bodies. That enlivens them to the fact that even in a pandemic, we can have great fun. We can do things. We can still create despite the pandemic being out there around us, that in our bubble where we're all safe, it's business as usual, it's life as usual, and let's all create the experience that we want to have, and not allow ourselves to shift to that fear. And so whether it's doing it for the kids or whether as an educator you're doing it for yourself, being aware of what's going on in your head and the emotional state that you're creating. It's very important, because whatever you're creating in yourself, it's ultimately it'll be in your body, it'll affect your body, it'll affect the way you receive your children and the climate that you're creating in your classroom.
The word that comes to mind as you were speaking is grounding.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And an easy technique for that is, if you're feeling anxious, if you're starting to feel, that energy and it starts to come up in your body, just put your feet in the floor, think about your feet all the way to your toes, take a breath, breathe right down into your feet, and you start leading what your body feels like. You're not letting your brain and your nervous system hijack you.
Right. Oh, I like that.
Simple. It's just keep it so simple that you can just go, oh, anxious thought, breath, let it go. I'm in my feet. I'm in my body. I'm solid. I'm powerful. I got this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This. And we have this.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, well, Anne, it has been such a pleasure. I wish we had, much more time that we could talk, but you've shared so much in the short amount of time that we did have this discussion. And I think, people will have something really concrete that they actually can think about and that they can try. And so I'm really grateful that you could be with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Traci, and thank you so much. Keep up the phenomenal work that you're doing with your enterprise.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye.
Bye.